So now let's take a few minutes to kind of review the framework development plan once more. So I think we're going to have Jack, Andrew, and Ian.
Yeah,
I'll come on board. So the goal is to just, again, answer any questions that you may have in regards to the framework development plan. There are a lot of work items that people have started to think about from the committee standpoint, and also some individual comments. So hopefully you can bring some of those up at this point.
yeah. So I think I'll start with just a couple of comments that I took away and maybe give a sense as to what people might expect as part of the plenary. So in the discussions that I had where it was with security and standards predominantly, what I took away is that right now the plan seems to still fit. No one has come up with a use case or a example where we've been able to say, you found the example that breaks the model that we have been trying to think about. What I think is really necessary and what we began talking about is all of us have gotten feedback. We need to go back and tweak the plan over the next week, 2 weeks, release the formal document. We didn't put that out there right now for everyone to be reading through. It's about 15 to 18 pages. We figure it with a 40-page strategic plan. I will also say that the three of us, Ian certainly noted, I was the original drafter. We have tended to sometimes get in the weeds from a technology standpoint, and so there was some question about trying to create an executive summary. We have done that. I think we need to be tweaking that just a little bit based on the discussion that we had here. It's a 4-page executive summary. As we sort of go into this, I think what you should be expecting to see is that that document is going to come out. You'll have a chance to be looking at it. You'll have a chance to be commenting on it. That will be a positive thing. I think one of the big areas where we will learn a lot about the document is in the upcoming chair session right after this. I mean, one of the pieces that we're going to be trying to do is map out, what is the work plan that's going to be needed. We have Mike's roadmap for how to do requirements that have sort of been laid in there, but also thinking about some of the pieces that need to take place in terms of making the plan a reality. Starting to actually lay out a work plan, I think, will be a very informing activity, and it will also sort of begin to help us understand, is the plan right? Is it heading in the right direction? I think the other piece that I'll just comment on and then turn to my colleagues would be that the thing I am optimistic about the plan is that it's very flexible. You know, it's not a rigid, we're going to do A and only A, and it is this approach. It really has, in essence, a lot of subtlety in it, in that there are potentially 3 or 4 different things that we can be doing as part of this, and we ultimately need to do all 3 or 4 things to be creating the ecosystem as we envision it. And so one of the opportunities that's there is if one particular area starts to slow down, we have opportunity to use other areas to be continuing to make progress. And so I think that, to me, gives me confidence that the plan can ultimately succeed because it does have flexibility and it's not completely dependent on one set of things being done in a very early time manner in order for the plan to be successful. So at that, I'll turn to my colleagues and let them go.
So to Jack's point, actually, it occurs to me sitting up here that that flexibility comes down to someone asked earlier on the strategic plan talking about the negative case. So what does the failure condition look like for IDESG? And not being that extreme, what I would like to say is the plan, as we look at it, actually has at least 3 major chunks of deliverable that if we achieve 1 or 2 of them, we should be proud. And if we achieve all 3 is great, which is to say, we're going to learn as a body and as individual committees how do we evaluate an existing thing, an existing certification for identity content? I think that's pretty important, right? So taking something like the PEM and kin to it to say, how do we evaluate things for its identity capabilities or its privacy capabilities or its security capabilities? That's actually an important thing to produce as a body. The second thing that we're going to be able to produce is some set of requirements. And I think in comments I heard, a lot of it was around, can we pick a point in time and say, hey, 18 months, we've built this set of requirements, whether we call it baseline or full, actually is immaterial. Here's what we have. We should be proud of that as a body to produce that. So we'll be able to produce a corpus of requirements that can be used by us and by others. And I think that's the important part, so other people can point to these requirements and use them as guiding principles, use them as practice, incorporate them into other things. I think that's important. And then the third thing is towards trust marks. And I think those of us who are more engineering minded go towards trust marks because they're kind of a shiny thing and they're cool and there's really interesting things that can happen with the model. But it is a bit of a progression. So Jack, I don't think we're rigid in saying you have to do A and then you do B. I think we have the opportunity to create three very large, great things as a group, and getting just one of them is an important achievement. Getting two of them is great. Getting three would be awesome and achieve the mission. What it also gives us is flexibility about time, so that we can, as a group, say, in a year's time, we're going to have these things done. We should have our evaluation mechanisms in place and a set of requirements. Just arbitrary, right? This is something we're all going to get together and say. But it gives us a way of putting milestones out there, victories that we all can be proud of, that are things that not just this body can use, and that's really important.
Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah. So just to give you my perspectives on the plan. Within the subcommittee, my role was more or less to take the plenary's point of view. So the deliberative body, the members, what's important for our membership, how do we grow it, what tactics should we use to try to grow membership, being one of the objectives. If you take a look at the slide deck that Ian went through, it's posted through a link on the agenda. There's about 15 slides that were not presented yesterday, but they're part of the deck. They outline the various options that our group came up with and debated vigorously for several weeks. It's not every option possible, but it's the ones that our group felt could be most viable, right, given the pressures and options that we had in front of us. If you take a look right near the end of the document, what we've done is we've set out, should I display this?
If you want, sure.
Yeah, I'll just,
Oh, yeah, because it won't display for, you can't display.
And now Jack's
Yeah. Well, while what Ian was highlighting about what we can be proud of as a body is, I feel confident that the work that we have done and what we have proposed is going to be picked up by some of the communities of interest. I feel pretty confident that the education community is going to adopt a trust mark model. Now, a question that's going to be there is, will it be part of the IDESG trust mark model, or will it be our own? And you know, one of the things that I'm optimistic about is that I think we're at what we have proposed is enough of a leadership position that it is new and it provides the flexibility that some entities are going to benefit from, especially in something as large as the IDESG, where we've got such diverse communities that are under one umbrella. What I like to say is that we're not setting the floor, we're allowing groups to pick and go to the ceiling and go to the sky. So you could have trust marks that go well above and beyond anything that is considered the minimum that would be there that groups might want to adopt. And now, Jamie, do you want to get a question in before Andrews?
Yeah, a little one. Could you just remind me and us again, Neville has indicated that basically he's going to be revving on a short time. We're going to have a 1.1 pretty quick, and then they're going to go to the next round. In terms of your longer document, which has been summarized by Ian, which has been delivered on Wednesday, and which is going to go to the plenary at some point, on what I realize that it's created a bunch of deliverables and people are off doing other things. But aside from that, there's also the question of revving and finalizing and giving feedback on that document. What's your timeline for when you want people to most effectively give you feedback on the longer document, and by when and with what for a target?
Well, so part of that is in flux in the sense that we have to come back together, synthesize the feedback we've had just here, and that's going to take us, I would say, a week or two, just giving schedules and things like that. At that point, I hope that we have the full document, which I think will have some revision to it, out for comment. So let's say, I'm swagging here, middle of October, some of these things would be in the plenary's hands to really go through in detail and to add to and to comment on. So,
okay, so feel free to send you something now, but if we wait for the next one and within a month,
yeah,
that wouldn't be a bad thing.
You're going to have. See, I
what
would hope we can get as fast as possible both the summary and the full document to people as quickly as possible, synthesizing what we've got here, and then we'll figure out a timeline for comments, feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, because in the timelines, in the options that we put forward, we kind of say 0 to 90 days. So we prefer 0 day to be soon, not
Month, not days.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So some of the additional slides, if I'm trying to decide if this is too much detail or if
Just use the considerations.
okay.
Knowing Andrew, it's always too much detail,
Always
but
too much.
you should go ahead and do it anyway.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Too true. So at the back of the deck, that's available through the agenda link. There are all of the various options, the pros and cons rationale for choosing that as an option. One of the important things to realize about the approach that we took is we highlighted, or we drafted up various options which we thought were viable, feasible, executable. Then much of the discussion was which order should things be done. So do we try to get a rapid acceptance of as many service providers and individuals as possible early? Or do we go for the top of the pyramid and have them bring in members as we go? Because we can't do everything all simultaneously, have immediate success for all possible participants on day one. It will take time to roll out. IDESG itself has to gain organizational maturity to be able to accept an application from someone that wants to go through the programs. Remember, we're a fledgling organization. We haven't done this as this organization before. Lots of experience in running programs like this in the plenary, and it's very good. But this organization doesn't have the processes and procedures yet, but it will have to. Okay, so just some of the things that we were talking about in the sessions, right? Just a quick summary to try to give you a sense of the push and pull. Some basic considerations for any discussion or debate. There is no single completely right approach. Most ways will get us to where we need to get. Some will take longer, more efforts, different distribution of effort, but eventually we'll get there. The trick is finding that optimal, acceptable approach. There are some completely wrong ways of doing this, and we tried not to pick any of those. So if you see any options in there that are completely wrong, please let us know. What are we trying to achieve as an organization? Here are some different ways of expressing the mission. We're really trying to influence the existing participants in the identity ecosystem towards an NSTIC aligned version of what they do today. We're not going to tell them how to do it. We're going to suggest better ways and hopefully prove to them that they will benefit, their clients, their partners will benefit, by using these approaches. If any people have talked to me in the last few days, you'll realize that bullet 2 is a favorite of mine. It's about the communication of what do you do today that is what practices do you have that are secure, privacy enhancing, deal with interoperability and ease of use. How do you communicate that to any other party that you want to interact with on the internet so that they can make a decision whether or not to use your services in a certain situation, right? Yeah, I know that sounds like create a meta language for expression of configurations and stuff, but hopefully it's not really that. And really, at the end of the day, find out where IDSG sits in the world. Are we advisory? Are we a trade association? Are we a certifier? Are we an accreditor? Which slices of which roles will we end up doing? Go ahead.
I think one of the things that we really wanted to point to in that is, in many ways, we have thought of the IDESG as the sun that everything revolves around. And in a way, this committee was trying to be Copernicus, or however you pronounce his name, who said, you know, in reality, that is not the way things are. And that we have to recognize we're just one of the bodies that are circling around in this endeavor. And how do we begin to influence, support, and work with them? And I think that's been a big part of the discussion that we had, and a realization as we came forward that we're not going to have the ability right away to be the center of attention.
And those were the gist of the discussions I had last night. In why would anyone choose to associate with IDSG or go through the program? So we're trying to think of ways to help that along. This slide here is, it's kind of a chart of, if you would like the bullet to happen, then you should choose something along the lines of the sub-bullet. Okay? So if a higher priority for your position is that we need to grow organizational capability, then you would choose approaches that rely on existing programs, right? Instead of inventing immediately. We need to teach ourselves how to do this as an organization. If you want to keep in mind that most of us have day jobs, and the amount of effort required to get things done quicker grows exponentially, right? So then you choose approaches that keep the workload within maintainable, sustainable boundaries, so you don't burn out all the volunteers and people working on this. Revenue generation, then we get into the whole business model, fees, revenue generation, any of the options that have obvious ways to charge money for things that happen. Time to market, if it's very important to get out there now, then choose a flight path that gets us into the marketplace and running tomorrow. Right? If it's not so important, if it's build a better version 1 product and we can afford a delay, then don't get to the marketplace right away. So these are some of the pressures and considerations we were going through. And it comes down to, like, within the 5 of us that were chatting about this, we're working on this, we each had different priorities and different opinions about what would work best. Right? And you'll see some of the push and pull in the various options. Okay? And the last one here is ties into membership growth, plenary, right? What do we start with? Do we start with the shining examples, right? The trusted operators that are out there today that have large constituents that use their identity services? Go ahead, Kim.
Online questions.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Everyone here can read this. So.
Okay, so I have a couple of online questions. The first one comes from Anne Rakuya Robbins. Is it possible within the framework that an organization doesn't need a trust mark because of how they operate or are organized. I did mention an alternative approach of an agreement at the front end.
Well, let me turn. So there's nothing mandatory about anything the IDESG is doing. Think about it. Remember, let's go back to and stick strategy doctrine. This is voluntary. If people with providers of any sort, IDP, RP, I don't really care, want to have a visible mechanism to prove to other operators or to their individual customers that they adhere to certain things, Trustmark is an option, absolutely. But there's nothing mandatory about that. And so that's why I like to think about these three chunks of things that we're going to produce. Learning how to evaluate things, and a methodology that's repeatable for that, producing requirements and trust marks. Each of these can stand alone as a very important deliverable for this body. Trust marks just happen to be one of the three.
Additional comment. I think there needs to be someone who represents individual requirements on the committee. How can that be achieved? And then while Trustmark's work of engineers, the complexity does not favor transparency to the human user.
Well, where I would probably comment on the latter point would be that we've really been using trust marks for thousands of years. I mean, you think back to wax symbols on envelopes are really an early form of trust marks. You know, the seal that a king has was a trust mark component that would be there. And so, you know, this idea of trust marks not being supportive to the individual, I think if it turns out that that happened, then we didn't do it right. But there's nothing about the plan that sits there and says this will not be beneficial to the individual or be useful for the individual that may be there. And so I don't think that anything in the plan really presumes that that activity. I would say that this committee is hopefully going to disband by the end of October. And we're all nodding our heads, I think. And, you know, and what that says is that the product becomes a product of the plenary and a product of the committees and a product of the management council. What we've given you is the initial draft or the, you know, maybe an 80% document that is going to then be adjusted and moved forward as others are dealing with it. So that latter point about joining the committee, again, I expect there's going to be ample opportunity for people to be commenting, to be writing in this. Our hope is just to be dotting I's, crossing T's, fixing language. That's probably not the right time to be saying, let's add more people into a committee to be doing the final edits.
Jack, Jamie Clark from Oasis. I want to ask you to consider something that I think may also help Ann with her correct surmise that an individual user, their eyes would start bleeding if they tried to understand some of those tables. No offense, John, wherever you are. Mine did too. One of the ways that we're suffering for our intellectual success is that we have a bunch of really overloaded phrases like trustmark and framework and that. And it may be that when people hear the word trustmark, they think of something like the UL, Underwriters Laboratory Seal, or a certification from a Kantara or a place like that today. And in fact, what you seem to be moving towards, and this is an open proposal which anybody with concern about it is welcome to comment on for a while, is a series of mini certifications that will be consumed technically and rolled up into things that humans and organizations see. Not only do I not expect if everything happens as described in the framework today, not only will a human not be actually going through to see if they have certifications 124, 125, and 36. Frankly, Jack, you know, most of your in-common or Internet 2 members will not be looking to see by number. They will simply be told that they need to do a certain thing and reach a certain level for purposes of their community of interest, And if they care to inquire, it's turtles all the way down. They can find something that says, and by the way, this indication that you're ready to participate at level foo in this group happens to be composed of 102, 136, 138, and 40. And the techies could go down and interrogate that, and so can individual. But I just don't really ever expect the end user institutionally or individually to be going down that far unless they want to self-code. So I think this stuff all rolls up and we're having a nomenclature problem. But let's work on continuing to describe that as this builds out, and it will perhaps become more intuitive.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think it's a great way of expressing what I think we've been trying to express less well. What we also have, Jamie, and you alluded to this, is we actually have an opportunity as an organization to create from on top of the work of others, but we have a blank page. So how we would like to bring a representation of good behavior on the part of a provider to our citizens and our students and other operators is ours to determine. There is some very promising technical infrastructure that GTRI is building to help us do some really creative things in support of that. But this is our blank page to fill, how we would like to take this representation to a multitude of stakeholders, individual and organizational.
And Ian, let me just say 2 letters about that. UX. Seriously, if you look at the Creative Commons licenses, or you look at the main open source licenses, you've got a whole bunch of legal text, which also will make your nose bleed if you read it. But they have managed to roll it up under a couple little cute logos and letters. And people look for letters, they're going, well, you know, let's see, I'm going to publish this thing. Well, Larry Lessig used CC-BY, so good enough for me. They never read the text. They don't have to. So we can roll up all that detail under things that individuals and organizations can easily metabolize. And that's part of where we're going to need help. Mary, are you listening? From the UX people, right?
So I would just comment that we do agree with you. And I've had the discussion with John about the fact that GTRI rolls these things up into what it calls a trustmark profile. I think then it's overloading the word trustmark. I think
profile.
And profile. Yeah, exactly.
We really are out of words, Jack. Right. That's our problem.
So the challenge that we have is we do have a vocabulary. I am assuming that there are a lot of smart people. I look at you, I look at Tom, I look at Scott David, I look at some others. And what we're going to end up doing is having some people who really understand what words mean broadly in different contexts come forward and say, well, maybe you want to use this word. And we have heard others sit there and say certifications might be a better word than trust marks. But but I really want to let experts who can sort of bring a breadth of discussion that I don't have to the table and comment on this as to what the right framing is going to be. But we agree with you that
I just wanted to leave it in hi, Ann, for Ann's question. That, the answer is yeah. If we're actually making some end user look through all of Von Dalt's tables or a successor, we've done something horribly wrong.
Well, but I would also say, just in that point, that there is a 0.5% of the population that will look under the covers. And it's often that those people looking under the covers that end up discovering the things that were trying to be hidden that are really helpful in through these things. And so by the fact that we will have a roll-up model, but you can go back and see all of what is rolled up into that very easily, I think that's a positive thing that often we haven't had with the one marks kinds of thing.
Thanks.
Kim, anything else online?
Sithrama?
Hey, so I'm trying to react to the comment that Ian made, which is that we have an opportunity, we have a blank sheet, we have a white page that we can actually start drawing on and defining what the ecosystem should be providing to the end user. From my understanding of what has been presented like 2 days back and my conversations in the past 2 days, the sense I'm getting is that in the interest of attracting a lot of participants into the ecosystem, like right today, or at least in the short term, We would like to start by recognizing the existing certifications that the organizations already have. So that's like a ticket for them to get into the IDE ecosystem on day one, right? So my question is, these two things don't seem to gel together in the sense that if we are trying to define the ecosystem, but we are actually depending on some other certification which has probably some other interests and motivations. Again, going back to the branding and the trust mark, when a user looks at this IDESG logo or some other logo, what impressions do they get? I think we have an opportunity here to actually define what impressions the user gets when they look at this logo, right? And if we are saying that, oh, that's kind of at this point loosely defined, we don't know, but at this point we are letting in organizations that have some existing certifications which don't really gel with the IDESG motivations. I think we will lose the user.
You can start.
Okay. Couple things there. Thank you for the comment. So, first thing is, the promise of a blank page is also the terror of a blank page, where you just stare at it, you're like, duh, God, I can do anything. Well, the problem is you can do anything, right? We could literally take this anyway, and we could spend an infinite amount of time trying to figure that out. And I think you brought up, interestingly, some of the tension this group has very much felt, which is one of the starting positions is we need membership and impact in the market with a certain velocity towards the now end of the time spectrum. And on the other hand, we want to do the right thing for as many people in as many ways as possible. There's a little bit of tension there. Let's be frank about that. I think one of the things that may not be, that we may have misstated or not stated clearly enough is that the consideration of existing certifications and whatever else, protocol, you name it, is not swallowing those certifications whole. I would be shocked if any certification that any committee looked at said, oh yeah, this absolutely 100% matches up to our expectations of what IDESG compliant behavior is. It would blow my mind if that was the case, because if that was the case, then we have this redundant effort which people haven't been focused to do. No one's been convened in this manner. So two things. One is acknowledging people have gone through audit and certification of other things, not making them double pay for an effort to go through, I think is very, very important. But we also have to be very clear about there will be gaps. And until those bodies who offer those other certifications fill the gaps, and I think this is to Colin's point of let's use some influence in those bodies to bring our recommendations, the gaps that we identify, to them. We're going to have to fill them with clearly described requirements that we say to providers, it's great that you do X, but it leaves off requirements we have around privacy. It's requirements we have that leaves off, and we need to see some evidence that you're doing these things. This is a model. So we think that at least it gets, looking at certifications that exist and providers that have them is a way to get people into the process, identify certifications to be analyzed, and should highlight the gaps that exist there that we all can help patch. But it gets a little bit of market impact, right? More participation. It identifies obvious places to start working, so we don't have a blank page so much as one that's sketched loosely. And it gives the committees an obvious place to start saying, how do we express the way we fill these gaps when it comes to experience or security or privacy or whatever the case may be, or community of interest? How do we want to express our requirements to fill those gaps? So that would be my thought on that.
So,
Go ahead.
So I understand the motivations for trying to get the doors open and have participation, because yeah, it's easy because they already have existing certifications, right? But what I'm not finding, and which I'm trying to understand, is what is our game plan to, if we say that the ecosystem initially is going to be composed of all these entities which have this so-and-so certifications, right? And we know that we want to take the ecosystem from this stage to a future stage which actually satisfies the IDESG principles, right? What is the game plan for us to get from the day one where everybody has joined into the ecosystem and to that day where it's not going to be this number of people, but it's actually going to be fewer the participant, the service providers, is going to be fewer than what has been there on day one. So how do we explain that, right? That's, I think, is not what's clear to me.
So I would say two things to that. One of the benefits, I think, of the approach that we have laid out is it allows you to understand where the gaps are between what is the practice today and what the goals of tomorrow are going to be, the full baseline requirements, what is actually happening today in practice, because people are doing practice today. There's a whole set of standards and other things that people are operating under. And so as we see that there are small gaps, we know we can raise the bar, and say, all right, we can raise the bar, understanding when we say this is mandatory in the IDESG, who are we going to lose from being able to participate in the IDESG? Right now, we have no visibility into, if we set a bar of requirements, who could actually comply, when they would be able to comply or whatever. And so the fear that is there is you go in and you create a set of requirements and literally, people will sit there. There is no mandate that people have to adopt. It's voluntary. And if we make the IDESG requirements so high that people say, I don't see the value for this, I don't see the benefit, and it looks like a lot of work, they're just not going to bother, because we don't have a force of law that is sitting there saying the IDESG requirements are mandatory or must be done in these certain circumstances. And so what we've tried to do in this approach is do it slowly. Ecosystems do change over time. That's the whole point of ecosystems. And what we're trying to do is create the starting conditions that we think are favorable for it changing to be meeting where we want it to go in the future. And that was the approach. And I think there will be feedback that says it's the wrong approach. We're comfortable, but then what's a counter approach? And how would that work better is what we would turn around and ask people to come back and say as they comment on the plan.
And
that's what.
And in the options, the balancing of those two approaches are in the options with pros and cons.
Yeah,
we tried to put the pros and cons.
You'll see about a dozen pros and cons
Yes,
on both of those options.
Let me publicly admit that I didn't read that 15-page document, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah,
that's fair.
You've had 5 hours to read it.
So I'm going to do the 3-minute rule.
Okay.
Okay, so there are a few online comments. This, I think, is more rhetorical, but Ann Recuya-Robbins had a follow-up to the earlier conversation. And it said, so are you saying individuals should just trust their elders or those more technically endowed, or just trust the experts? I don't think that is going to fly in 2014.
yeah. Well, yeah.
No one's asking.
No one said, yeah.
The next one is from, Bob Farron. But if the IDESG relies on jargon that is not understood and accepted by users, reliant parties will not accept non-commercial elements. Does the panel agree?
I didn't quite follow the question.
Let me just reread it one more time.
Yeah, okay.
But if IDESG relies on jargon that is not understood and accepted by users, and I think this was in regards to the conversation that you all are having a little earlier about combining, well, anyway, our reliant parties will not accept non-commercial elements. Does the panel agree? I can ask for clarification.
Yeah, or just have him send us comments so we can get that dialogue going.
Yeah, and I think that one of the aspects to consider is that we actually have, assuming that the plan is acceptable and we agree on a path forward, one of the things that is intended to come out of IDESG is an actual implemented operational program. If we design it and use language that is indecipherable to the people that we would wish to have come through it,
They won't operate for long.
we'd perhaps be making a bad choice. So it has to be consumable by the desired audience for the program. That means we have to take user experience very seriously. We have to define our terms very clearly. So yes,
So I'd like to end with just a comment, which would be, if I was coming back to the plenary in 3 years, what I would deem success of this plan and this effort to be is that stakeholder communities in the IDESG are racing forward to be issuing community-specific trust marks that blow away anything we ever imagined we would get as an IDESG trust mark. Because I think there will be communities that will be willing to take the bar and really raise it high in different categories around privacy, around transparency, other things. And what I like about the model is we've created a model that's flexible enough that this can happen. And that will ultimately, if we're correct, begin to put pressure on other communities to be saying, well, look, it's working here in these communities. It can work in other communities as well. And I think that race to the top is really where we want to try to be incenting people to go. And to me, that would be the success marker in 3 years, is that we're seeing that activity take hold and start to happen, not just among our communities, but also I'm going to use seeing Colin up there internationally. I think you'll be seeing, this model could also take hold in other countries and be a spot where certain countries are racing to the top as well. So
and sorry, for what it's worth, in Dave Cox's pilot presentation for ID Data Web, very specific comment he made was, by going through the privacy evaluation methodology and changing their architecture to meet the needs, he's discovering that the strong privacy protections that they've built in are a market differentiator. One of the aspects of the approaches that we're considering here is it gives organizations like ID Data Web the ability to communicate that to potential customers. So if they have a market differentiator that is aligned to one of our principles, they can tell their customers that they do it very well, and exceed the bar that we've set, if they choose.
So, Colin Wallace, mine is just a very short, hopefully sort of kind of summary comment, because I think we all probably had great conversations at dinner last night and various tables and so on, and I had a pleasure to be with the one with Seeth Rama and Andrew and Peter Taplin. And one of the, I guess I finished this week with, you walk away from plenary or any meeting with some key things in your mind. The first thing that it's sitting right in the front of my mind at the moment is the guy who's not up there in the panel. And the final thing that Peter Alderman said before he left the stage was, "Don't overthink it." And I think that you guys have got to a point where you've actually got you've got something. This is the point that Peter made last night. You've got something that you can actually, put out on the table. And I'm mindful now of Kalia's mantra from IIW: whoever shows up, shows up. And if you add the fact that this is a fledgling organisation with money borrowed or donated by the US government, and eventually it's going to have to stand on its own 2 feet, then if people show up, in thinking of our outcomes, we've got to find one of those tools that we've got, in the framework plan that you've developed, that we're going to use to try and welcome them into the tent and work with them and influence them over time. So let's not get hung up about, which is better than a different approach and what order it should be in. Whoever shows up, shows up. It's unsettling to not know which way we're going to go, but that is what entrepreneurialism is really all about. And so let's just try and settle and just see who shows up, and let's take one of the tools out of the toolbox and work with them. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin.
There's one more online comment. This is from an anonymous user. Is there a tension between IDESG as a player, financially self-sustaining, and influencing existing certifications? For example, if the IDSG is wildly successful in raising the bar for other certifications or trust marks, does the IDSG make itself redundant? Would that be success?
That's a really interesting question because on one hand, my knee-jerk reaction to that is, if we do that amazing a job, maybe not in 18 months, let's say it's 36, maybe a little bit further, and we've raised the tide significantly so that a variety of certifications now have in them our requirements, essentially, reflect NSTIC principles, make everything better, then I would be extraordinarily proud of our efforts. And if that meant we weren't viable financially anymore, but what we had created was a methodology of evaluation, a body of requirements, and maybe a mechanism for trust mark, maybe not even a trust mark, but communities picked them up and ran with it, then we spent those years well. And I would have no shame in saying, we did our job, great. We should all get a round of applause and pat ourselves on the back and go take that in our own communities further. That's a perfectly viable outcome to me.
Yeah, I would agree with Ian that I think I would say all of us are here because of the NSTIC vision and how much we want to see that achieved. If at the end of the day it gets achieved by others because of the work that we have prodded them to do, I'll still be happy for the fact that it probably wouldn't have happened without the work that we have prodded people to do. I also, when thinking about the ecosystem, word that we use, there is extinction in ecosystems, and that sometimes happens. And if we get the right results, I'm fine with that.
Because remember, the mission of the organization is not to exist forever. It's to make the internet a better place.
So thank you. We don't have any more questions online. I don't see any more questions in the room.